Welcome to Thought in Motion, a series dedicated to the seminars of Jacques Lacan. Today's video is on Lecture 14 of Seminar 1, entitled The Fluctuations of the Libido. Following questions will be addressed. 1. How is desire realized in the subject? 2. What is the function of speech in analysis? 3. What was Freud's mistake in the famous case study of Dora? So let us begin with the first question. How is desire realized in the subject? We discussed in the last video how the ego is that function in the subject that misrecognizes its desire. This misrecognition emerges from the original specular moment. We project our unformulated, chaotic desires onto the other who mediates this desire on its way back to us, now in a distorted form. This relation of alienation is how the subject comes to identify itself as the ego. The imaginary relation with the other offers a framework for our primitive libido in which we fluctuate between love and hate. First, we invest libido in the other who offers us our ideal ego, experience in the register of love. Then, there's a regression of this libidinal position, leading to aggression and hate. It's here we find the basis for the Oedipal rivalry. The mother becomes the loved object while the father represents a barrier to it, leading to a retreat of libidinal investment, manifesting as a hatred toward the father. We can also see here how there's a double meaning of the phrase, the subject's desire is the other's desire. First, the subject's desire is the desire for the other and produces feelings of being in love. Second, the subject's desire is the desire that is in the other, leading to hatred. One's desire in the other leads to hate because it represents the site of my alienation. It also leads to hate because it represents a source of competition and rivalry as ego and alter ego desire the same object, which in the Oedipal rivalry is represented by the mother. But this imaginary relation has far wider implications for our lives and what's going on in society today. Collectively, we place our imaginary investments in objects that can lead to intergroup rivalries that spill over into violence. And this can be a very effective means of generating political power, such as when leaders take two groups identified in their perceived poverty and turn them against each other by suggesting that one group is taking away the other's loved object. As the child's desire passes through the specular other, it continuously receives approval and disapproval, acceptance and rejection. These responses by the other take hold as the rules of the game, so to speak. And this is what Lacan calls the apprenticeship into the symbolic order, whereby the child learns the rules of their social situation, generally communicated verbally by the word no. Through this apprenticeship, the child learns to consent to the law which serves as the foundation for the symbolic order. With this comes the internalization of language, and it's language that offers the opportunity to realize or recognize one's desire. Such recognition is done by naming desire through speech, which mediates desire and brings it into a system of language. Anyone not familiar with Lacan, and even those who have read him for a little while, can often have difficulty wrapping their minds around how language can be so powerful as to be the means of realizing one's desire. How is it that naming desire can be so transformative? Lacan offers a clear demonstration of it in the example of the name elephant. He says that without even so much as ever having seen an elephant, much less having one amidst us at the moment, we can make decisions about them that have immense ramifications for them. Naming the elephant thus is greater than the actual animal. It is the first reason that Lacan will say that the symbol is greater than the object. It's also a reason why naming desire can be so powerful. And in case you ever wonder why the cover of the French edition of Seminar 1 and the English commentary on Seminars 1 and 2 have the elephant in front of the cover, now you know. Perhaps you can think of examples in your own life when the name has had such power. Feel free to leave any examples in the comments below. The question, what do you want, is exceptionally important and powerful. It could almost serve as a ritualistic prayer in which we perpetually ask ourselves, what is the desire that is operating in me? It's a question without any definitive answer, but a question that can spiral into ever-deepening considerations of the question. There's times in my life when I experience free-floating anxiety, in which almost everything and everyone can evoke irritation. I then become fixated on every momentary settling of this irritation. But in asking myself, what is my desire? It requires that I look at my anger differently. And on occasion, a name comes to mind, that perhaps I'm seeking respect or appreciation that I'm not currently receiving. This has the power of transforming the very meaning of my anger. Of course, if I stop asking the question about desire at this point, I'll have aborted the process of reintegrating my desire back into my subjectivity or of reconstructing a history for it. The point is that even though we should continuously try to name desire, we also shouldn't settle on any single name. Now we'll address the second question. What is the function of speech in analysis? Psychoanalysis is called the talking cure. This title is especially appropriate when considering Lacan's approach. Through the fundamental rule of free association, psychoanalysis frees speech from the petrifying understanding of the ego, which thinks it knows what it says. It also frees speech from the demands of courtesy and coherence that restrict it. Free association is not aimed at getting the analysan out of the imaginary, but rather to inaugurate oscillations in the mere relation to the other. In these fluctuations, the analysan can begin sensing how their ego functions, identifying those objects that give it consistency, nourishment, and body. It also allows them to see the diverse parts of this image, recognizing the stages of desire as they express themselves in the ego's history. This idea that the ego has a history is important because, as you'll recall, the point of analysis is reconstructing the subject's history. By delivering a history to the ego, the subject may integrate the ego in and through language. So the first phase of analysis induces a passage from a position whereby the ego is unknown to the subject to a recognition of one's imaginary investments through the act of naming. Without this recognition, desire becomes forbidden and thus becomes repressed. More precisely, it's speech that is repressed and embedded in the subject's symptoms. The act of naming shifts speech from these symptoms to being embodied in the history of the subject. It authentically integrates the subject's desire into the symbolic plane. Lacan also notes, again, that the recognition of desire is not the same as its satisfaction. Desire is always the desire for desire, the desire of desire, not the desire for satisfaction. This aim of analysis to reintegrate the ego overturns a widespread way of understanding analysis. Such an understanding is typically encapsulated in Freud's famous statement, which the Standard Edition translates as, "Where id was, there ego shall be." In other words, the goal of analysis, according to the standard interpretation, is the strengthening of the ego to override powerful unconscious influences. The French translation, which Lacan and his audience would be most familiar with, reads, "Le moi doit déloger le ça," which translates, "The ego, le moi, shall or must dislodge the id, le ça." Lacan has a different reading of this, which he'll address in the following lecture. In short, he understands this as the need for the ego to be reintegrated into the subject. In light of this role of speech and analysis, we can now answer our final question. What was Freud's mistake in the famous case study of Dora? This case study by Freud can be found in the 7th volume of the Standard Edition under the title Fragments of an Analysis of a Case of Hysteria. It concerns a young woman with the pseudonym Dora who developed various physical symptoms without any underlying medical explanation, including coughing and mutism, what has been called hysteria. Dora was brought to Freud by her father upon accusing the husband of another couple, Herr K., of making unwanted sexual advances. Herr K. denied this, as well as her father disbelieved it. However, Dora soon tells Freud of her father's love affair with Herr K's wife, Frau K. And Dora believed that her father was offering her to Herr K as almost like a kind of exchange. Ultimately, Dora terminated analysis with Freud following his interpretations of her dreams that suggested Dora's repressed desire was for Herr K and her father. Freud identified this as a failed analysis because he ignored the role of transference and later expressed regret that he didn't emphasize Dora's feelings for Frau K. So what went wrong here? Lacan states that Freud involved his ego in approaching this case, talking to Dora at the level of experience of others, by which I think he means on the level of the imaginary. This led Freud to operate out of the imaginary understanding that girls are made to love boys, which led him to suspect that Dora is secretly in love with Herr K. A critical point here is that the subject must name their own desire. It can't be the analyst's role to name it for them. To get there would have required Dora's oscillating between love and desire. In that situation, she may have first seen Frau K in terms of her ideal image, reflecting narcissistic love. Freud actually just stopped there and didn't go any further with it. He didn't allow for the oscillations of Dora's ego that may have opened the possibility to see that Frau K was more than a mere object of love, that she was in fact the object of desire. And Dora wasn't allowed to name this desire. Lacan ends this lecture by identifying the second phase of analysis, which he states requires understanding the function of the ego ideal, its relation to the superego, and how the analyst is to occupy this function for some time. And we'll end our time today on that note as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.